So hi, my name is Alia. I was recruited into the porn industry by a customer in a strip club. I had experienced a lot of sexual trauma, sexual exploitation, and had been trafficked underage. So I was a young single mom, very young single mom. And so when I was approached with the opportunity to have more consistent pay, which is what it had been described as and portrayed to me at the time, for doing a lot less work, that's how I entered in.
My name is Joshua Broome, and I currently live right outside of Iowa City, Iowa. And the way that I got in the porn industry is I moved to Hollywood. I was modeling and I was having some success in that capacity, but I had to, like many people, work a job to just provide some additional income because modeling is very seasonal and I wasn't very responsible with my money. And in that restaurant I was working at, someone said, hey, we would love to introduce you to a porn agent. And I said, okay. And I met with that agent and he offered me, various opportunities, like, to do movies and to do to pose for Playgirl and things like that. And I said, sure, why not? I was a naive kid and I was out there looking to try to become somebody. And I said yes to that. So ultimately, that is how I got in the industry.
I was trafficked as a child. It started through, I had a makeshift kind of OnlyFans account before OnlyFans was out. So I started selling nude photos when I was like 16, 17 years old through Facebook. And it caught the eye of many creepy old men. So that's how I started in the porn industry.
I'm Deanna Lynn, and I had started in the porn industry. I had my introduction to like the world of porn by working in a restaurant that was known for exploiting women, and I was 17 years old. And they had entered me into their swimsuit competition where the winner won a layout in a magazine, a nude magazine. And they were pretty particular about the type of sex that they allowed someone to sell. So like the girls who worked in the restaurant, they couldn't work in strip clubs, but they were prostituting by night, working at the restaurant by day. And then the prize for the swimsuit competition was to be in porn. So I'd kind of learned there that there were like acceptable ways of selling sex in our culture. From there, two of the girls that I was working with had set me up with a modeling gig to model lingerie and swimsuits for a local tanning salon. And by then I was 18 and already an alcoholic, and this happened to take place at a bar. And so this beautiful, beautiful woman that was leading it introduced me to this well put together man in a suit, and he had shots of alcohol on his table, and he had offered to help me with my modeling career. And before I knew it, in 1 year, like I was spun out on drugs and raging alcoholic, and then he had prostituted me. And so from there, it was like I was being put up in a hotel. Different people were coming in my room every night. He stood outside with a gun, and I was on my way to doing jail time. And he had said, what if I could get you out of this life altogether? Like I could make you a star. And so he had groomed me so that I would be able to handle what I would enter into when he sent me to California.
Hi, I'm Aaron Crowley. The way I entered into the porn industry is actually before my official, I guess, professional porn shoot. Back in freshman year of college, I had been out at a party and I was blackout drunk, and a group of guys decided to rape me and take pictures of that and share that online. And so that was essentially my first time in porn, and that numbed me to the idea of sexual trauma and it being recorded and shared publicly with the world. And then a couple years later in college, I was on a hookup app, and a man messaged me and said, "Hey, I think you'd be great in porn." And I went to his house, to his studio, and he took pictures, and from there he actually proceeded to ask for sexual favors. He asked for oral sex, and as I was looking at him undress himself, he was like, "This is a part of the industry. If you want to be in this, if you want to do this, then you need to do this." And in my head, I'm like thinking, I need the money. I need this. And so I acquiesced to his request. And that's essentially how I got into the porn industry.
For me, it happened after I left the industry. So I left the industry in 2012, and as recent as 2018, 2019, I have 200 fake profiles of me online. My images are all over Tinder and various other dating apps. And the issue is when you sign a contract, like you already don't know what you're getting into. Like anyone that's selling themselves for sex, like you're not there to make a business transaction. You don't really know what's going on. You don't read that contract. I've never, because every day you would show your test, you would show your IDs, you would sign the W-9, you would sign the contract, bada boom, bada bing, it's done. And you don't think about it because you're already there and you're already displaced to a certain degree. So I say that to say there's still movies coming out that are compilations of things that I've done. There are images that are being sold and repurposed and resold. And not ever did I say, yes, that's okay. I actually have spent the last 7 years almost advocating against it. I may be this fictitious person when it comes to my stage name. It doesn't exist, but my legal name is tied to that contract at one point. But the legitimacy of those contracts, it just, the lines are blurred to so much. But man, it's like to have my images on dating sites and there's nothing that I can do about it because who knows owns the rights to that. Because often when a company would, they would pay you to shoot a scene and that scene would, go to a DVD or whatever. But also there's that audio, there's those pictures, and, there's the video. And they individually repurpose and sell those things to different companies. So that one video you shot and made X amount of dollars on, there's 10 or 15 people that own different pieces of that content, and they're making all this money off of it. And a lot of times they're like, Joshua, well, are you still getting royalties? I've never made 1 cent in royalties ever from porn. So that's just not something that exists.
I actually want to echo that sentiment of you sign the contract, you don't really know what's going to happen in the scene. Like, I don't think I've ever signed a contract with like full awareness of what was about to happen. And actually, many times in the scenes, there were things that I was uncomfortable with, or I was uncomfortable. Like in general, there were various scenes where I was in pain and I was like, okay, hold up. I can't go further. I can't do this. And they're like, well, we're almost done. We're almost done. Anyway, we're never almost done.
Yeah, so I would agree with Aaron. There were a lot of experiences that I had where I would get a booking from my manager, and I would show up, and midway through the scene, I would realize that what I was booked for, what I had been told that I would be doing and performing was not what the scene was going to call for. And there were certain boundaries that I had put up when I had signed my contract, saying, okay, I'm not going to do this for this amount of time, or I'm not going to do this at all. And quickly those boundaries were just looked at as like, well, if you want to make this, that's, the industry isn't what it was 10 years ago. You can't put those boundaries up now. Or like you're being ridiculous, or you don't want to be looked at as being difficult to work with. When it wasn't like an attitude thing, it was like, hey, these are the things that I like don't feel safe in, I don't feel comfortable in. These are my lines. And while they were agreed to when I was signing my contract, that, like Joshua said, I never read, my initial contact with my manager, they weren't things that I was looking at when I was signing these individual releases at every scene. And they weren't things that I was willing to lose my financial stability over when I was raising a child. I was already dependent on this income at this point. I had already given in to just allowing the community around me to know that this is who I was. And I couldn't lose that at that point because I had no other options. So that force, fraud, and coercion looks, I think, a lot different than what people might envision force, fraud, and coercion within the industry to look like, at least in my experience. Definitely not in some of the experiences of others. I know it can be a lot more upfront, but for me, there was just a lot of like, well, they're not going to book you again, so get back in there and suck it up and don't cry about it, and smile, and just a lot of deceit in that as well, in the not being upfront with what was going to be expected. And I remember scenes that I left crying because those were things that I told myself I was never going to do, or that I just wasn't ready for, and yet, like, you have to do what you have to do in that moment to be able to continue to pay your bills and be able to know that there is going to be rent next month.
Just exactly what she was saying. There is this subtle manipulation by someone who you are compensating to advocate for you. Like, coming from someone like I was in, I did mainstream modeling and acting prior to that. And I had a great agent that fought for me, that protected my boundaries, that, was making sure, like, if I was staying like wherever, it's like, if I was 15 and I was staying somewhere, it's like, there was, a guardian in place or something. There was always someone watching out for my back. And what happens in porn, in my experience, that your agent, and then, the time that I was in the industry, I saw this happen to many, predominantly women. Your boundaries are auctioned off by the person you trust to different companies. It's like, yeah, she said she wouldn't do this thing, but how much? Because we treat sex as transactional, as people as products. So we should be able to buy what we want, and we should be able to take, that this person is, mine to you. So I should be able to auction them off. And I know that you said you didn't want to do this, but how much? And I think that's something that happened over and over and over and over again. It's like you're no list. The performer language would say, this is my no list. These are the people that I don't want to work with. These are the things that I don't want to do. And you take the time to articulate those things because they're important to you. Yet that trust is abused because they take those things you won't do and they say, okay, well, just, I'll protect you. But in actuality, let's hold on to this, because the longer you don't do it, the more valuable it will be. And then we will get more money for it later.
I hate the way we talk about consent today, because the way we talk about consent is the way it was taught to me even, was you just need to get a yes. And, it's never, we never are thought to think about the context behind that yes. Like, you don't know if that person is being force frauded or coerced or being pressured in any kind of way. You don't know what the situation is. And so the thing that I advocate for, and I know that probably everyone here advocates for, is enthusiastic consent or an authentic consent, which I don't believe is at all present in the porn industry. I've never seen it. I don't believe I've ever experienced it. If we're talking about consent as a bare minimum basic yes, then sure, I guess in that sense, I consented. But the thing that brought me into the industry was I was trying to gain control from trauma. And this seemed like, subconsciously a good way to gain control. I thought if it's happening to me anyway, I might as well get paid for it. And being in poverty at the same time, it just helped, make me, I guess, vulnerable to do that.
Yeah, consent is a really tough one for me. And my husband and I were talking about it the other day because if you're talking consent, yes, I was an 18-year-old girl that was addicted to drugs, trying to avoid jail, and really wasn't sure if I was actually going to live or not. And the porn industry became various forms of escape and different addictions for me in place of some of the stuff that I had left behind. And the thing that's hard for my husband and I is that, like, yes, like that very broken, immature, hopeless girl in my past gave consent, but here I am 10 years later with this beautiful family and these newborn twins, and I don't get to choose who purchases me anymore. I don't get to choose who sees my most humiliating and traumatizing moments. And it's just really unfortunate because I wish there was some sort of statute of limitations on consent or something, where if somebody wasn't in the industry for a certain amount of time, give us a chance to make a new decision out of what we know now and how we feel and the healing that's taken place, and just see how much porn would be left out there if you gave us the chance to do that.
Yeah, I think about these consent videos that we had to make at every shoot, right? Where they would go through this list of questions about, like, did you see the other performers' tests? Has anybody forced you to be here? Are you on any sort of drugs or alcohol at this shoot? And just how we would just answer like, no, 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 knowing that many of those were just total lies, right? And there would people be doing drugs in a dressing room or drinking or whatever the case may be. But then we would sit there and we would film these consent videos. And I'm thinking back to like the end point of my career where I had someone who was I was no longer a part of the conversation. I had my manager and I had this guy, and they were doing everything and I was just showing up. I had no idea what I would be doing or where I would be going. And then there were shoots where my manager wasn't even involved and it was just this guy. And so this person would drop me off and pick me up from these shoots. They would it was a very transactional experience. Clearly, the sense of control that I had, believed in naivety that I had, was definitely gone, and any sort of veil that was there was gone. And yet, when they would ask this question, has anybody made you be here today? Has anyone forced you to be here? With them well knowing that this person was in control, and with myself knowing the answer was still no and the scene would continue. So consent in the industry is really just a box to check. Who can I say? Can you say yes? Are we going to say yes? Did somebody say yes on your behalf? Okay, check the box and move forward.
To her point, it's like, if you choose to not want to do something while the scene is happening, like, what's stopping them from using that? Like, you could, I've walked out of a scene before because something was happening that I didn't want to happen, and I saw the first part of that scene on the internet. I've seen, several things like that. But what I was going to interject earlier was, I think the porn industry, it advocates for and advertises no doesn't mean no, it means not yet.
Yeah, I just think that, authentic consent is impossible with the exchange of money. And I think it's all about power differential, and people gaining control for you to make sexual content.
I've heard this recently, and I love this. The money is used to bypass consent, because if there wasn't the money, none of us would have agreed to it in the first place.
After being desensitized and going into hotel rooms, sometimes up to 5 times a day, I really felt like this is my only path and my only journey, and it really instilled many negative thoughts about myself. When I was in these hotel rooms with men, I was detaching. Like I wasn't there with them. And I was, having a lot of mental health issues. I was, using substances to kind of cope and numb with the trauma that, from my childhood and from these sexual acts that I was exchanging for money. And so I think that it really made me feel stuck.
Being in porn almost made it possible for me to become two people, even though I was one person. And what was hard about that is, like I would sit there in the editing room and I'd watch them like airbrush me for covers. Like I'm 105 pounds and they're airbrushing every single flaw in my body from like 18 to my early 20s. Things I didn't even know weren't things that I didn't even know would be a problem, or weren't sexy or whatever, weren't appealing. And so it was really hard is I would become that character, and I would become almost addicted to the attention and the fame and all of that stuff. So when I actually tried to get into relationships, I felt like nobody would want to be with me. They'd only want to be with her. And so like I would be so insecure that when I dated somebody outside of the industry, that I felt like he was going to leave me if I couldn't lure him back in with who I once was. So I would actually show him who I used to be, because I didn't even know who I was anymore. I only knew how to be this fantasy that they made me to be, and how to sell that. And I couldn't even connect with myself on any level deeper than that. And that was a real problem in learning how to relate with people again.
Yeah. And I think about that duality, right? Because that was something that I definitely experienced also, that being two people and that trying to integrate those two people, but really having the performer overpower the authentic me and who I was, and having that person bleed into my interactions with my like real relationships, whether they be friendships, relationships with family, relationships with a significant other. And it definitely impacted the significant others that I was choosing. When I look back and I see, like at the start of when I started in the porn industry to where I ended, the people that I had chosen to spend my life with were definitely a reflection of what I thought of myself. Because this was the person who could accept me, and that person became less and less like who I would have originally wanted, or what I think of now when I think of like who is that person, and more of just like, well, who will, like who can and who will and who's willing to have me, because of what I am and who I am and what I'm doing, and to cover up that shame and that grief that was just inside of who I really am inside of Alia, that performer, and that person that would show up on set every day came into my personal life and kind of tried to cover. I used her a lot, not just in my performer life, but as like to protect me, because she didn't care and she was better than she was better than you because of what she was doing, and all of those lies that I had been told and those lies I had been telling myself, I would continue to tell myself in order to cover up just that grief and that shame that I was experiencing.
The way I saw myself, I began to devalue myself as my career progressed. So I went from doing scene, I did straight scenes, and then they were like, well, it's not a big deal, just do this like solo masturbation scene. And then later on in my career, like, well, here's the salary that you would have made in a year for 3 months if you do gay scenes. And then all of a sudden I kept saying yes to more, because at the end of the day, if I saw myself as a product and my only value was indicative of me selling myself for sex, my value dissipated over time. And how I saw myself was not as Joshua Broome. That person was long gone. Because day in and day out, I interacted with people on set. They called me by my stage name, and that caused me to feel ashamed and guilty. So the authentic relationships I had in my life, I started pushing them away. And that's when I fell into a very deep depression, because anyone that actually knew me, I was ashamed of who I was and what I was doing. So I separated myself from them. I stopped answering phone calls and texts from my mom, my friends, my brother, and I pushed them away because I saw myself as dirty and used up, and I saw myself as having no value. And that's how I saw myself. And that's why I stayed in the industry for so long, because I was like, hey, this is the only thing I can do. There's no one else that's going to want me. There's nothing else that I could ever add value to. There's no company that's going to want me to do anything for them. And I just think the lines of my boundaries sexually, and just my boundaries of me as a person, they were just blurred, because I had no idea who I was, because I was so detached because of what I was doing day in and day out.
And the sad thing is other people will reinforce that belief. Like other
Correct.
talent, male performers, female performers, the fans, the producers, the directors, they will tell you, you can never do anything else now that you've been here.
Everything everyone is saying, that was what was going on inside. Like all of that, like I totally resonate with everything you guys are saying. But on the outside, I was one of those people who was like, oh, I'm being empowered. And, especially being like a guy, especially being a gay guy, like we're told, oh, your value is in sex, and like, oh, you're more of a man the more sex you have, and like all of that. And so, having that from our culture, being put on me, like I'm thinking, yeah, this is awesome. I'm awesome. Like, it was something outwardly, I was like, yeah, I'm so proud of this. But inwardly, everything everyone is saying, that was what was going on. Like that worthlessness, each and every scene and each and every single time doing it is just more and more feeling that like depth of like worthlessness. And actually many people who knew me back then don't know that I was attempting suicide several times during my time in the porn industry because of that worthlessness going on. But again, outwardly, I was like, yeah, this is awesome. But that was what was going on inward and in private.
The guys in the industry, for the most part, like when I was in the industry, there was a core group of guys who worked consistently, particularly if you worked for the same director. It's like the same guys would work for this director. And if you were, so the girl I was dating, she was very popular in the industry, and she would work with these people who I saw day in and day out. I worked, 25, 30 times a month, and more likely than not, I would have interaction with these guys, and they weren't my best friends, but they were acquaintances at least. And you're trying to navigate through, trying to have a monogamous relationship when you both are having sex for your occupation. So I was very jealous. So this idea of I was like the person that I cared about and I was in a relationship with was having sex with people, number one, but they were having sex with people that I knew and had relationships with. And then she wanted to talk about it, but I had created this idea that, well, it's not real, so we can talk about it because it's not real. And I really just introduced this almost masochistic behavior because we were having conversations about it and it was hurting, but I so desperately wanted it to be okay, and it wasn't, and it just like slowly like chipped away at my mental health. And that was one of the things that segued me into really fighting some deep depression and ending up, for me, like I never attempted suicide, but it was something I thought very hard about.
For me, romantic relationships are really challenging. I mean, I've endured, a lot of trauma growing up and within the commercial sex industry. Now, when I'm in my relationships, I'm comfortably able to strategically share parts of my story. But that was a huge challenge for me, being a young adult now today, and like paying rent, like paying all my bills, and then trying to navigate how to be in a healthy relationship when, from majority from 16 to 21, I was exchanging sex for money. I mean, it's been a process to learn what's romantic and kind of like how to share myself with somebody else, because I trusted many of the wrong people. So to be entering a relationship, it's been challenging for me, and it's good to be able to have a partner that's open-minded, willing to listen and supportive.
It became really difficult for me to be honest and be in a committed and like monogamous relationship during my time in the industry, because I would have to lie so much to myself about those things we were talking about earlier with consent. I would lie to them about with my partner. I wouldn't feel like I had the ability to put up boundaries in that relationship because I wasn't able to put them up in my work life, and I wasn't able to be honest there, so I wasn't honest in the relationship, and it really took away from a lot of intimacy in any sort of relationship that I went into. I was a mess in relationships. And a lot of that had to do with the messages that I was receiving, not just from the scenes that I was performing, but from the relationships with the people in the industry that I had. And I would go to them for advice of like, okay, well, how do you guys do this? Like, how do you navigate this? And a lot of the answers I would get was like, oh, well, I just lie, or I just don't tell them. There's not everything that they need to know. And then it would be those same people, those same like directors that I would be coming to that then would be like, offering for me to do things offset and things like this. So it was just a very complex thing to try and navigate how to be in relationships with people, both in romantic ways and not in romantic ways as well, during my time in the industry.
Yeah, I'd say it's really hard when every class of person has purchased you, because it's not like limited to these kinds of people. It's like everyone you could possibly imagine, somebody in that field or class has purchased you. And I went through a healing program that was specific to women who had been exploited, purchased, or trafficked. And I just remember having these conversations of like being so terrified. Like the women in this program and me were so terrified of what to expect when we got married, because not only did we receive that while working in the sex trade, but like I dated somebody who wasn't purchasing me for sex, but took out what he saw from the industry on me and would tell me like no one was ever going to love me and all this stuff. And he would repeat some of those things that he would see. And I would do that because this guy loved me. He's not purchasing me. Like it's a step up, like he's not paying me. And I just remember like the people that these wonderful husbands, these wonderful spouses and families, this beautiful love that I was witnessing around me, they were mortified. Like they were like, we would never do that to our spouse. And I had no idea that a lot of the stuff that I had been trained to do was not a normal part of healthy sexuality and love. And so I'm so thankful because, I did meet a wonderful husband, um, and he had values similar to mine, and that was something that was important to me, that he already had certain values that he was living by, and that I didn't like impress them upon him. And so when we came together, we both lived out those values, and when we got married, it was like it's so awesome, the relationship and the trust and the love and the actual intimacy that we have, that I had no idea would ever have been possible. But I had to heal from all the stuff that I had gone through before meeting him.
I think it's important for everyone to know that each and every person has intrinsic value and each and every person deserves love. But for me, I had never experienced love, so I had no idea what it was. And I saw myself as a product of my mistakes. So for me, what changed my life was someone looked me in the face and said, "You are not your greatest accomplishment, and you're not your biggest mistake. You're the person that's standing in front of me right now, and you deserve love, and you have value." And I never saw myself like that. So like, I would just like to encourage everyone. I don't know where you are as far as like the relationship, like with someone, or if you have friends that value you and love you. But man, the person that told me that, we've been married 5 years this July, and we have 3 kids, and my life is like absolutely different than it was 10 years ago. But it took someone loving me right where I was to change my life.
Two things come to mind when I think of like really common misconceptions. And one actually just came to me through this like teenage TV show that I was watching, like an old TV show. And the woman was really upset at her boyfriend using porn. And he just kept saying the words like, "it isn't real. It isn't real," which is like, yes, like what you're seeing, like that's not what you can expect from people. But we are real. A lot of people make that disconnect and feel better about using pornography, but like we are real people. So even though like we're on the other side of the screen, the other misconception I would say is, and this is one that I had believed while working in the industry, is that porn is helping marriages. And I thought that I was helping people to come closer together. And it wasn't until I actually saw a marriage destroyed because a fan of mine had come and stalked me at my office across the country. And when he realized I was real, um he like that fantasy broke, and he ended up taking his life when he returned home. So like here's this wife and these children that now don't have this person in their lives anymore. I meet with married people who were raped repeatedly because like they didn't know that that wasn't what sex was supposed to be, and both of them didn't know. And so they're just going, the spouse is just going along with it because they're like, well, this is my spouse, like I want to connect, but they're literally being raped. And so I think that's a huge misconception, that porn is helping marriages.
I was going to say, I think another misconception that I've encountered a lot is that men need porn, like it's necessary, and that we have to have porn. And I just want to say that that's absolutely a lie. Like you can function sexually without pornography. In fact, it's way better without pornography whenever there's true intimacy involved, because porn is doing tying in everything that everyone else just said. It's actually dysfunctioning your intimacy, whereas without it, you'll have a better intimacy.
I had very limited choices growing up. I grew up in a broken home with a lot of family dysfunction. I mean, my ACE scores, that adverse childhood experience scores, were fairly high. I experienced housing instability growing up, food instability. My main parent person was my mother, suffered from a lot of mental health challenges, which impacted her ability to parent me. It felt like a way out. It felt, I mean, I was growing up in severe poverty, and to have access to instant money felt cool.
Because a lot of LGBT youth experience homelessness, and a lot of because of family rejection, or they run away because of not feeling supported by their family. And many of them end up resorting to prostitution in one way or another. And I encountered that actually a lot with other people who were in the industry while I was in the industry, as many of them were bouncing around from hotels and friends' couches and stuff like that. And they were paying for it by, being in porn and stuff like that. And also substance addiction was a common thing I encountered, and people were trying to pay off or pay for their substances, their drugs, and all of that. So that was something I encountered often, that homelessness, poverty, all of that.
Well, Aaron made a good point that, LGBTQ youth are experiencing homelessness, at higher rates than other youth. And I think that really, we often forget to talk about trans youth in these conversations. But typically, I mean, I was, most of the trans youth that, felt like it was normal for them. And that this is what they were supposed to do. They had a hard time finding jobs during their transition and stuff. And what we're seeing now is, trans youth are, it's very common that trans youth are exchanging sex for needs.
I think one commonality that I had encountered was a lot of people had some sort of sexual abuse, overt or covert, in their background. And I think what people tend to forget is not just the ones being purchased had experienced that. And I can recall sitting in the office of an award-winning, global award-winning producer who had tears in his eyes, like a tough man, had tears in his eyes because his daughters were becoming of the age of the ones that he was portraying in his films. And he had used these films as a way to perpetuate the fantasies that were sparked when he was a young boy being molested by somebody in his family. And so he's repeating that cycle and perpetuating the trauma, and he's making that connect when he starts to have children of his own. And I think people forget that not only are the ones being purchased the ones with trauma, but the ones doing the purchasing have it too.
For me, I was an anomaly in some ways, because I didn't carry any trauma necessarily into that. But what happened is being in that industry was the trauma in itself. And I think often people assume people who are in that industry are like, oh, they must have went through all this stuff and they must have really needed, money. It's like, absolutely, that happens. Absolutely. But what you're looking past is the detriment the industry itself causes. For me, I had a lot of success. I made a lot of money. And when I left, I didn't have that money. But there was a 2-year period where, I ran from my past and I lied to everyone I met because I didn't want anyone to find out. But I had 1,000 movies online. So there was no way I could run from it. But I continued to lie anyway. And I think that, from an occupational standpoint, it's regardless of what skills you have or what education you might have, the main issue is you see yourself incapable of being someone other than the person you portrayed for so long. And I love what everyone was saying. It's this multiple personality to some degree, where I have to put on this mask and be this person that I'm supposed to be so that I can get the check and have to do the thing that that person says. But at the end of the day, I had no idea who I was. Like I had skills and talents that allowed me to get a job in a gym, but when it came to interacting with people, I had no idea how to be genuine. I had no idea how to love anyone because all I experienced was lust. Lust takes, love gives. And it's like, if someone wanted to take something from me, I was used to that. But when someone tried to give me kindness and compassion, I rejected it at first because I didn't know what to do with it. And I think like that is a commonality that I've seen with people I've talked to.
When I think about the people that I know who've successfully made it out of the industry and went on to find a lot of healing, not just stay out, but find a lot of healing and live lives that look very different, have relationships that look very different. I think each of us found a way to understand that intrinsic value that Joshua was talking about earlier. Each of us found a community of people who were willing to treat us with that intrinsic value, whether we believed in it that day or that hour or that minute or not. Because sometimes, especially I know in my healing journey, that changed minute by minute, whether I believed in it in myself and still does. And so we surrounded ourselves with people who believed that about us, regardless of what we had experienced, regardless of what we had done or what had happened to us, or who we were, or what our name meant. They believed in that intrinsic value, and they were willing to love us hard, and be there and let us slip up and let us make mistakes, and let us learn how to just kind of scramble through life and figure out who we were, that were willing to walk alongside us in that. And that community was extremely important. Every person that I've known from the industry who's left and gone on to live a life that they were told that they could not live, has chosen to do things very differently. The life that my friends who've left the industry have now doesn't look like, okay, well, I just stopped doing porn. It looks like I made like tangible moves to unlearn the things that brought me into the industry and the things that kept me there and the things that the industry taught me.
I think it is really valuable to know that when you are in the industry, your value is indicative of, how can I sell myself? Like that you truly believe that. Like that's why I stayed in the industry for so long. I believe my value was indicative of me being able to sell myself for sex. And then unfortunately, from my experience, 30 people in my life personally who were dear friends of mine took their life because they looked at their life and there's nowhere else to go. And they believe that's what made them valuable. And that's what porn portrays. And that's what porn does.
The very first scene, I guess, the very first thing I did in pornography was absolutely 100% not consensual. I was drunk and I was raped and pictures were taken and that was shared online. With OnlyFans, that just opens up a further platform, another platform for them to do that type of stuff to people.
I mean, every time there's a new law, I think there's a lawbreaker. And I think essentially that's what this is, right? I think that OnlyFans has found some type of loophole, and we as, a society haven't really caught up to it yet. But eventually, I'm sure OnlyFans is going to be taken down like Craigslist and Backpages. Craigslist and Backpages were my platform to being exploited, right? So I think that OnlyFans is just another lawbreaker that found a loophole. Hopefully will be held accountable one day. But yeah, essentially, it's what I was doing when I was a young adult. It's building a fan base. What these young adults, it's easy money. And then the young adults are able to get fans And these fans are accessing, you know, pornography images, amateur style. I mean, these people are uploading videos right off of their own phone. You know, if you just Google OnlyFans, there's articles that say that. I saw an article that said OnlyFans is changing sex work forever.
I was actually just talking to some friends that are in the industry currently, and one of the things that they had mentioned was that people don't realize, like the fans can request whatever they want, and so they're taking you to limits that normally maybe you wouldn't think to go to. But again, it goes back to that, like, do I want to make money today, do I not? And then that cycle of like, well that fetish is getting met, and then that goes back into the industry of like, now we need to increase the shock factor, which was already happening with mainstream television, because everybody's getting so desensitized to what used to be porn now being available in our regular television shows, that, you know, in the industry, producers were like producing more and more shock factor just to get people aroused anymore. And I think I see OnlyFans kind of having that same effect, because I mean, they would just say the worst of the worst is being requested right now.
For me, I didn't believe that this existed, that there were people who left the industry successfully. Um, but I actually watched Deanna leave, and got a hope from there that something else was possible. And I feel like that's something that we as this panel can be. And like, if you're somebody who's watching this, that is struggling with leaving, that is struggling with going back, just remembering that like we do exist and we're here. And I know for myself, like I would love to talk to you if you're a performer who is wanting to leave or who has left and is struggling in that journey. Like those are my favorite conversations to have. Those are the people that I'm able to connect with the best and that I get most excited about.
Yeah, so I think to the people that are still in life, I would just like to say I believe you, and definitely connect.
To a person who's thinking about getting in the industry, or who is in the industry, I would say you're worth so much more.
Speaking directly to someone who is in the industry or thinking about being in the industry, you have no idea what you're in for. And it's a lie if you tell yourself that it's not going to hurt you. It's going to hurt you. It's going to hurt the people that you care about, and it's going to last forever. You're telling yourself a lie if you believe that that's not going to hurt you. Because as you consume that content, you blur the lines of what you want sexually. You create this insatiable desire for more and more and more. And the lines in your own relationship are blurred. All of a sudden, you start to send a text that you shouldn't while you're in a relationship. All of a sudden, something becomes okay that once wasn't. And all of a sudden, the boundaries that you've set within the relationship, maybe with yourself or with a significant other, all of a sudden, those lines are blurred because of what you're saying yes to on a daily basis.
One of the things that helped me was when I heard that freedom was not the right to make choices. It was the ability to make choices that keep you free. And that was something that I was lacking for most of my life, is the ability to choose things that were going to bring me life and not death and harm. And so I would say just surround yourself with people who can help you to make those choices that are going to keep you free and going towards the person that you're wanting to become. Because like I couldn't do it in isolation, and I don't think we were meant to. Healing, life, like it's all relational, and it's really important that you have people to help you to achieve that kind of freedom. Because for most of us, I would say, like I think there was this lie that we were empowered because like we have a right to be here and we can make this choice, and I'm going to choose when and who and this and that to a certain extent, but that didn't keep me free. It wasn't until I was able to make choices that were good and healthy and for the long term that I was able to truly live free.